views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Open Tuesday, a weekly program providing you the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, and today is Tuesday, April 27th. Coming up, should we expect to wear face masks post-pandemic? Are face shields as protective as masks? And what are the effects of double masking? Dr. Panagis Galiatsatos joins us to answer these questions and more. Then, are you looking to invest in stocks and trading but don't know where to start? We'll speak with trader, investor, and YouTuber Thomas Carvo to learn some stock tips. After that, how will the legalization of marijuana affect small businesses in the Bronx? Michael Brady of the 3rd Avenue Bid and Peter Madonia of Belmont Bid join us to discuss. And candidate for City Council D14, Adolfo Abreu, shares how Public Power NYC aims to make energy more affordable in response to increased price hikes and several blackouts caused by the city's main energy supplier, Con Edison. So please, stick around. Open BXRX Tuesday starts now. Welcome to Open on BronxNet. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, inviting you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. Adopting the use of face masks to slow the spread of COVID-19 has become the new norm. Should we expect masking to ever go away, or should we prepare to continue wearing masks post-pandemic? Joining us now to share more is Dr. Panagis Galiatsatos, Assistant Professor of the Division of Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine. Welcome, Doctor. Thank you so much for joining us.
An honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course. So let's get straight to the point. Should we expect to continue wearing face masks even after the pandemic diminishes?
I'm going to make the assumption that I think it will still likely be a personal decision if those face mask public health requests have been removed. However, I do want the population to strongly consider it. For example, this year alone, we saw drops significantly in other airborne diseases such as influenza, RSV, and a lot of it having to do with both physical distancing as well as face mask policies. So I'm hoping people, if they are going out into public and may have a runny nose, grab a face mask, right? It's one great way to be effective to not spread germs where you go out. And I say this as a lung doctor too, right? A lot of my patients wear face masks because sometimes they harbor bad germs inside their lungs and they don't want to spread that to other people. So I'm hoping face masks do become a public health acceptance, regardless if it is mandated or not.
Thank you, Doctor. Are there currently any downsides to continued mask usage over time that we should know about?
None that I'm aware of. And I say this as a person who wears face masks probably about 12 hours a day in the hospital. In addition to, keep in mind, as lung doctors, we see a lot of patients with really decreased lung function. One of my favorite cohort of patients who always are near and dear to my heart are those struggling with cystic fibrosis. Many of these young adults that I take care of are operating with about 30 to 40% lung capacity, and they wear face masks all the time when they go out into public. As I said, some of them may harbor some bad germs in their lungs, and so they don't want to spread that when they go out. So they wear these face masks and are perfectly fine. Actually, one of them sent me an email last year around this time saying, "Oh, I'm so glad people are wearing face masks. It means I don't get to stand out in public." So there is no bad consequence physiologically when wearing a face mask all the time.
Right. And as more people get vaccinated, Doctor, should those who are vaccinated also continue wearing face masks? I know there's a lot of misconception there, but does getting a vaccine just automatically disqualify you from wearing a face mask?
So it's a great question, and it just depends on what you plan to do. For instance, if you've been vaccinated and you plan to hang out with other people who have all been vaccinated, if all of you have been vaccinated, you can put down the mask. The CDC has emphasized that. Now, let me take a quick step back. The purpose of the vaccine is to prevent disease. It does not mean it prevents transmission. So when the vaccines were studied, it was studied to say if you caught SARS-CoV-2, will you develop a severe form of COVID-19? Preventing severe disease is something known as sterility immunity. However, if you plan to hang out with people who have not been vaccinated and don't have any immune protection, there is a plausible potential that you could spread the virus to them because, again, the vaccine was not proven to stop transmission. And so it depends what you want to do. If you're going to hang out with a vaccine group of individuals in that bubble, you can safely put down the mask. If you're going to hang out with unvaccinated individuals, you should continue to abide by the public health requests of stopping transmission. Because the fear is, if I catch it, even if I'm not going to develop symptoms, I could potentially still pass it on to someone else who has not been vaccinated and therefore cause them to have harm.
It's very important to distinguish the difference between the two groups, knowing the fact that we have our bubbles if we do have our vaccines, and if we don't, we still have to keep others protected. So thank you for that. What are experts like yourself finding about the effects of continued face mask usage? Is one particular type of mask better than another?
So for the purpose of stopping an infectious spread, right, the face masks that we advise have to fulfill 3 criteria. One, it must cover from the bridge of your nose to the bottom of your chin, right? You have 3 orifices right there on your face, most people do, where microbes are easily breathed out, right? So 2 in your nose, 1 in your mouth. So first criteria, covering the bridge of your nose to the bottom of your chin. 2, it must be a face mask with multiple layers and maintaining consistency, meaning not those masks that have filters in them. Those are used for different purposes, like if I'm going out to fight a wildfire, right? But for the purpose of not spreading germs, you want the mask to be one uniform throughout, right? No filters and so forth, and multiple layers to catch as many of these microbes coming out. The third criteria that I tell everyone, it's got to be comfortable, right? If you're going to wear a face mask that's going to be itchy all the time and you constantly have to pull it off, it's defeating the purpose, right? You wouldn't wear uncomfortable shoes all day. You would be miserable. Don't put on an uncomfortable face mask. Find one that fulfills the first 2 criteria and you like it. It feels great on your face.
And doctor, here in New York City, the Department of Health actually recommended double masking along with the CDC. A lot of people worry again that double masking can impact their breathing or suffocate them. As a pulmonary specialist, is this true? And do you recommend double masking?
So one of the things I think that got lost in that message is 2 things. One is we've always emphasized a multiple layer mask. For instance, I go out and teach local schools about the physics of face mask, and we make it clear, like you can take a t-shirt, fold it over in itself, you have a multi-layer face mask. The multiple layers is what we're looking for, right? And that's always been a consistent message. The challenge that we've seen over the last year is an inconsistency in how face masks are worn. Sometimes people are wearing a face mask like it's on, but clearly you can still see their nose, or clearly they're wearing it like a strap, or it's falling down. One of the advocacies behind a second mask is that it kind of helps reaffirm the first one. So it helps keep that mask in good position. So it's one of the reasons why we've advertised it. It's easier to inconsistently wear one mask. It's very hard to inconsistently wear 2 masks. So from my standpoint, my emphasis is continue wearing a mask with multiple layers, which is almost every mask, and make sure if it fills the criteria we said earlier. Bridge of your nose, bottom of your chin, covers the entire face, and it's uniform in pattern, and it's comfortable. So to me, like if you want to put on 2 masks or 3 masks and your breathing is still fine, sure, go for it. But I wouldn't go as crazy as like I put a duct tape a pillow to my face. No, obviously your breathing then will be impaired. So to me, the multiple masks, right? It's more of a different approach to trying to get people to comply with an appropriate mask wearing and the appropriate mask. That's where I think that's coming from. So I don't want people to be like, what are we going to go up to? Like 40 masks? No, just wear the initial mask correctly and you should be fine.
Right, absolutely. And as we know, face masks have changed a year into the pandemic. As it gets warmer, we're starting to see more diverse face coverings, like shields that go over the face. I'm starting to see those a lot here in New York in particular. Are these shields still protecting people as much as face masks do?
Yeah, so I've always said shields should never be a replacement for a face mask. They can be an adjunct. That's appropriately fine. But keep in mind the shields, your most common ones, still have openings throughout that are much larger in size than a face shield would be, than a face mask would be. So the face shields alone are gonna, they're gonna be great for the eyes, but they're not gonna be great for doing what we wanted to do, which is catching aerosols leaving our nose and mouth. So from my standpoint, I imagine someone could sit back and say, well, I can engineer a great face shield that just kind of boxes in your face. That's fair. But I think the most common face shields that we see still have these large openings at the sides and bottom, and that's going to defeat the purpose, right? Your microbes will still get out there. like one thing I would just want to say, like we have Mother Nature trying to constantly defeat the human species, right? From earthquakes, hurricanes, wildfires to this pandemic. We have simple tools to defeat it, right? And so from my standpoint, we ended two other coronaviruses in 2003 and 2013, SARS-CoV and MERS-CoV, not without a vaccine, not without a cure. We stopped it with the face masking and physical distancing. We can do that again. So that's it. Face shields I think are great as an adjunct, but not as a replacement.
Right. The ones I've seen around kind of look like the Daft Punk shield that band wears. Those are popular nowadays, and I see them everywhere. But yeah, for sure, they're not as protective as those face masks that shield our mouths and our nose at the same time. Doctor, we've heard the term long COVID. What exactly is it, and how is it caused, and can it be prevented?
Yes. So actually, let me. We'll stick with the first question. So what is long COVID? So it's been kind of a name dubbed to people who had COVID-19, survived it, and then still are struggling with symptoms. And so from a nomenclature standpoint from the medical world, we usually dub that after about 6 to 12 months. Some of us use more of the 12-month criteria to say if you're still having symptoms after that, then we would call something long. And we see this with other viruses and infections and pathologies as well. So for survivors of COVID-19 who are still experiencing symptoms, we started our clinic, for instance, at Hopkins and many other medical centers throughout the nation to help these patients. Because what is happening is usually one of three things. One, these could be symptoms just around healing. And I say this not to take anything away from the symptoms people are experiencing. But for example, if you broke your leg and you wore a cast for 3 months and I took the cast off, you're going to be miserable. You're going to be in pain as new muscle has to regrow and strengthen. You're going to be in pain. And I tell people that's not a pathological pain. That's a pain part of healing. And your lungs are kind of the same way. After they've been ravaged by COVID-19, it's going to take time for them to kind of come back, right? So you got to be cognizant that you may still be short of breath after COVID-19. So could these symptoms be part of healing? Or could they just have unearthed a subclinical disease that maybe you've always had, but you never really felt the consequences of it until you got knocked out by SARS-CoV-2. Or for some smaller group of patients, a whole new pathology has developed. And so we look through that. The third thing I will say, sometimes we don't know. The constellation of symptoms people are experiencing, we may not have an immediate answer. However, the reason why I advocate to join a post-COVID-19 clinic is because you're going to get these doctors, nurses, psychologists, therapists, all advocating for you to try to figure it out. Because even if we don't have an immediate answer, you're going to have advocacy. The last thing I would say, the best way to assure you don't get long COVID is to not get COVID to begin with, right? And I know that's easier said than done in a time of like we are now, especially with COVID-19 fatigue, but don't let our guard down, right? Because Mother Nature's not. She sure is not going to let her guard down. So don't let your guard down, because the best way to beat COVID-19 is to not get COVID-19.
Thank you so much, Dr. Galiatsatos, for joining us today. How can people stay in touch with you and learn more and, just keep in touch with you and your work?
Yeah, no, happy to always reach out to the community. Actually, one of the things that has been incredibly humbling over this last year is so many people have emailed me to talk about cases of their loved ones. Yesterday, I had a person discuss their father-in-law's case in Ireland. So you can always email me. My email is always open and I'm always checking it. Sometimes you may get emails from me at like 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So don't be, I'm just working. I'm also on Twitter. You're welcome. I think my DMs are open, but you're always welcome to kind of send me a message on that as well.
Thank you so much again, Doctor, for your time today.
No worries. Thank you. And it's been an honor. Thank you.
Absolutely. Dr. Panagis Galiatsatos is the Assistant Professor of Division of Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine, co-chair at JHHS Health Equity. We'll be right back here on Open Tuesday.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption
of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting from Bronxnet, this is Carvo. The world of investing and trading has grown exponentially during the pandemic, with more than 10 million new brokerage accounts opened by individuals in 2020 alone. How can you start in trading and stocks? Joining us now to share more is trader, investor, and YouTuber Thomas Carvo. Welcome, Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome.
Today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So let's start with the basics. In case people are watching and they aren't familiar, what is stock and what does it mean to own stock?
So just keeping it very simple, essentially what it is you're owning a small fraction or a small piece of a company. So if you like a company, for example, let's say Apple, you have the iPhone, you use their products, you like the company, you believe in Apple long-term, you can get a piece, you can buy a share of Apple. And these days, actually, you can actually own, a fraction of a share depending on certain brokers, which we can talk about in a little bit, but you get a piece of that company. So you can kind of stay along for the ride through the growth and have a share in a sense.
Thank you for that, Thomas. And, COVID-19 has definitely impacted the stock market. In the beginning of the pandemic, it looked like things were dropping, but now they're back up. Can you tell us a little bit about the impact that the pandemic has had?
Yeah, it's been crazy. Back at the beginning of the pandemic, there were so many questions, so much uncertainty of, what's going to happen. All these airline stocks, you had, all these travel related stocks that didn't know, what was going to happen because of the virus and everything. And so a lot of stocks lost more than half their value in a very quick period of time, about a month, less than a month for a lot of stocks. And the markets in general, are down about 30% or so at some of the lows, which is kind of crazy. If you average out roughly over the past 30 years or so, you see about a 10% growth on average across the S&P 500, for example. And so, to see 30% down in about a month is crazy. That was a crazy crash. But since then, stuff has rebounded, dramatically. And we've seen stimulus, and we can talk a little bit about the impacts of that too. But that has really kind of fueled the fire, and people have come on to say, hey, this pandemic, as bad as it was, market's forward looking. And so now everyone's looking ahead.
Right. And a lot of folks seem to have taken advantage of the fact that stocks did drop and things became cheaper for them to access. So can we talk about just about some of the factors leading to the growth among new investors? Is it the stimulus check, remote work? What are some of those things that are impacting the growth in stock market?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I mean, you saw that when people were home now, especially, even if you were, even a college student, if you were someone who is in the workforce and now you're stuck at home, whether you're working from home, and those who unfortunately lost their jobs, you had to kind of say, okay, what can I do with my time? Either I could pick up something on the side. Many people picked up trading and investing on the side, and that turned into more than they thought, at least the past year. And so that was big, and especially the stimulus too. That multiple rounds of stimulus checks. At least I would say the first check, I think, was probably the most. We saw the most impact. It seemed like, at least. Across the market and across a lot of people sharing returns and how well they did, at least with investing their stimulus check into, let's say, Tesla stock or any stock of their choice that they like at the time. It seemed like almost everything has gone up since those lows. So it's been a crazy time for sure.
I have to mention that I appreciate you as a YouTuber, as someone who's sharing content with other folks who may not know about this subject matter, because a lot of times the stock market can be non-inclusive to folks who don't know about it. Can and should anyone invest in stocks, Thomas? What amount should people start with? What do you say?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, so I think that I believe at least everyone should at least have some money at least in the markets. I think it's a great way to compound at least that money over time. Now it depends really when it comes down to this, because most people, the statistics are actually show that about 90% of people who look to kind of actively trade, day trade and kind of short-term trade, they're actually going to lose money. And so for most people, it's not the best idea to try to start day trading and trying to make money quickly, right? It's best to actually stack your money away in either to long-term investments, so stocks or companies you believe for the long term. Like I said, Apple before, for example, could be a stock that you could hold for the rest of your life potentially, right? And that way you can compound that money over time. So I would say that you don't want to be going in with more money than you can afford to lose initially. And so the best way to kind of go about it would be, let's say you make a certain salary per month. If you can say X number of dollars every month, I can afford to invest and I can put that money aside, that money can compound. And if you average out 10% per year, you can do the math on how old you are and when you retire or when you want to potentially take that money out, how much more money you'll have down the road. So that's probably the best approach that most people can go about, is kind of think about the long game. Don't think about the short-term game. And that's probably the best way I would say you should go about it. But without money with money you can afford to lose or money you can afford to put away, at least for now, that you don't need for expenses.
Got it. Great advice. Thank you. And for beginners, they may be intimidated by charts and numbers when they see, stocks. They don't know what's going on. What would you recommend as the best and most user-friendly apps to begin trading with?
Yeah, there's a bunch of apps these days, and so it's kind of cool because Robinhood, for example, is one of those apps these days. Now, there's been kind of some backlash at Robinhood, what happened about a month or 2 months ago, and how they stopped trading on certain stocks. I think a lot of that was overblown to a degree in the investing community, but for the average person, a stock or an app like Robinhood, or nowadays there's even apps like, for example, Webull, and there's one called Public. Those are some apps that make it very, very simple. Webull, I would say, is more for like someone who's a little more active. It's a little more complicated in terms of there's more there for you to use in terms of features. So if you want that, you have the option to. But then you can look to kind of like your bigger name stock brokers these days. You can go to like, for example, a Charles Schwab, or you can go to Fidelity, or even TD Ameritrade. They all have, all these brokers, they have apps. They're not going to be as user friendly, for example, as like a Robinhood. But at least some people kind of feel like they feel more comfortable saying, hey, that company's been around for a long time, I'm going to use them. So it really comes down to kind of what you're comfortable with. And there's no harm in trying, in downloading 3 different apps and saying, hey, this app's cool, I like this one, I'm going to stick with this one. Then you can deposit more money into it as you see fit. So that's kind of how I would go about it. Everyone's going to be different when it comes down to it, but there's a lot out there.
Right. And the next thing I wanted to ask is, what are penny stocks? And would you suggest them? Would you say that these are the best bet for newcomers with limited resources to invest?
So they're essentially, think of them as speculative stocks. So a lot of these penny stocks, there's different classifications and there's different types of markets. But for at least for what most people kind of will think of penny stocks and what they'll see penny stock as, low price stocks with a small number of shares available to the public, which they call the float. So I talk about it a lot in videos. The stock has a low float, which means it's really volatile. That's all it really means. And so when you have a stock that's at a price point under, let's say, $5, that has a float of, let's say, under 100 million shares available, somebody with a lot of money can come in and buy a large portion of that float or the amount of shares that's publicly available. And that can move that price drastically, right? And especially these days, a lot of these penny stocks, what they'll do is these companies, they'll put out a press release, and all of a sudden everybody's churning in, everyone's buying because that press release reads really well. And so these stocks are extremely volatile, but they're definitely not for everybody. There's a way to trade them that can be profitable and that can, over time, right, that you can learn how to play it. But for most people, it seemed like, I would say, even the past year or so, ever since the pandemic, anything you buy would go up over time. But now we're seeing kind of the downside of that, the backside of that, and we're seeing the resulting, a lot of these stocks are now dropping. So it's definitely not for everybody.
Thomas, you just mentioned speculating. Can you help us understand the difference between investing and speculating? And are stocks always about taking risks with your money?
Yeah, so there's always going to be a risk, no matter what, because we even saw what happened with Tesla. I think was in the news yesterday how there was a fatal crash, and you never know what could happen. Any news, anytime could come out about a company, about a CEO, even if it's Apple, even if it's any stock that you might like, right? So when that's the case, you're always taking a risk. But there's kind of situations where you can get yourself into higher risk and lower risk. Now, the way that I like to do things is I'm more technical, at least in terms of my approach. And so I like to be buying things that are already down, that are already, have fallen off, that have less attention. So that's how I minimize kind of my risk. But when it comes down to kind of investing or speculating, you can be investing in a company that you have everything in front of you, right? This company. Obviously, there's always risk, but you can be looking at, hey, there's everything's in front of us is coming from around for a long time. I'm going to invest in them. Then you can go more the speculative route, which I guess could be more the penny stock route, where hey, this company they have some really cool tech, but it hasn't been proven yet. It hasn't hit the market yet. Or for example, nowadays all these electric vehicle companies, there's a lot of companies out there that haven't actually got their cars. Like people aren't driving the cars; they're not in production yet. So that's more speculative. Where hey, that we know that sector is up and coming. We know that's going to be around for a long time. We know that's the future. But that specific company, we don't know if their cars are actually going to be good. And so that's kind of where you can draw the line between speculating and investing. Like Tesla, you can see it. People have the cars. Maybe people have. If you own the vehicle, you can at least that's more of an investing approach. Speculating would be, for example, a stock where another stock called Fisker, where they don't have production yet, but they're an EV. They're an EV company. That's more of a speculation. You can buy their stock, but we don't have a product physically in hand yet. So that's where the difference I see lies.
Gotcha. Thank you for breaking that down. And it does take a lot of research either way, whichever route you're going to take. No. So the next hot thing, the hot item, but the hot button item in the news is cryptocurrency. So Doggy Coin or Dogecoin, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but what is
I think Dogecoin, yeah.
Dogecoin. It has a dog on it. What is Dogecoin, and is it a smart investment or simply just a joke?
So it actually is a cryptocurrency, but it was created, I believe, in 2013 as quite literally a joke. The issue that you have with Dogecoin, where the difference lies, the main difference between Dogecoin and, like, for example, Bitcoin, there is a set kind of supply. So at any time now, there's Bitcoin halving, and there's more complicated ways to go into things. And there's Bitcoin mining that companies and people can do, but there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin ever in existence. Now, Dogecoin can have an unlimited supply, so that can continue to be mined and mined and mined, and essentially you can dilute the supply, to no end. So that's the difference, and it's more so a joke, and it's more so something that definitely would be. It's something that if you threw in a few dollars that you had for fun, that's all I would recommend, just to kind of be a part of things, especially how we saw even with GameStop a couple months ago. Definitely once it started, the price started pushing up over $100, that was not something that you realistically wanted to be in long term, potentially, right? For most people, valuation wise, if you start diving deeper into their numbers and their stock prices, didn't make sense. And Dogecoin, I think, kind of seen that same light. It just doesn't make sense long term. But it doesn't mean that it can't go up to $1. It's sitting at like 35 cents or something like that now. It doesn't mean it can't go to $1 or more in the short term if there's enough hype and there's enough speculation behind it right now.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Thomas, for your time today. Before we go, how can people stay in touch and follow you and your YouTube account?
Yeah, so the best way is just on YouTube. It's just Thomas Carvo is my channel. And under there, I have links to other resources and things like that. So that's the best way. I'm posting there pretty much every single day. So that's the best play. And there's tons of videos already on the channel and playlists I would recommend for a lot of questions to go back through, because that's where I keep everything.
Thank you again. We're taking a quick break here on Open. We'll be right back. York becoming the 16th state to legalize recreational marijuana, the move is expected to generate over $4 billion while creating tens of thousands of jobs. Here to speak with us about the impact this could have on small businesses in the Bronx are Michael Brady, CEO of the Third Avenue Bid, and Peter Madonia, Belmont Bid Chairman. Thank you so much for making the time to join us today, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course. So first, let's get right into it. What are each of your thoughts on the legalization of marijuana in this city?
Okay, I'll go first. And I just want to preface anything. I was at the first smoke-in, and it was, I think, Earth Day today in 1970 or 71. So everything I say is without value judgment, and except my own personal ones. Look, I think this is a train that's been coming for a while, and I'm not surprised it's happened. I hope it was thought through completely. I'm a little worried that it hasn't been thought through completely, which isn't uncommon in government and legislation. But I'm not shocked and surprised it's here. How it manifests itself over time is worth watching.
Michael?
Yeah, I would agree with Peter. I think, this has been something that's been in the hopper for quite a while. And I think, advocates like the Drug Policy Alliance, pioneers in drug policy like Joyce Rivera at St. Anne's Court of Harm Reduction have certainly helped push this. But I also think the threat of a fiscal crisis as resulting from COVID-19 also pushed the legislature to act faster than maybe some folks would be more comfortable with. And I think that, to Peter's point, I think, it's going to come down to getting into the weeds to make sure that, it's implemented appropriately. And that's often a difficult thing to do in government. I think legislators have a lot of great ideas, but when it comes to the implementation process, that's where it really matters. And I think it's going to be incumbent upon the Office of Cannabis Management to really make sure they do it the right way.
Now, with small businesses taking a major hit during the pandemic, could this be a way for businesses to make extra revenue? What are your thoughts?
I think it definitely could be, but it gets down to those details. As it is right now, there are some hurdles that would prevent that from happening when it comes to zoning, the 500-foot rule. Not all landlords could actually take a dispensary tenant, particularly if they had a federal loan, like a PPP loan, or if they had a federally backed mortgage. So I think, it's going to come down to getting into the details. And I think to fully realize what New York State wants to do, federal legislation is going to have to be, introduced. But I think that there could definitely be some benefits to struggling mom and pops. But, this is not a great panacea. It's going to take years for this thing to come online. And there are going to be a lot of hurdles and challenges in doing that.
Yeah, I would echo that. And if anybody thinks this is going to, change the unemployment rate dramatically, I don't. It might help some landlords who, the government has helped kill the restaurant industry pretty effectively. So maybe those spaces will get filled by some of this. But it's not. I don't think it's a game changer in terms of unemployment, and particularly in our borough. But I think across the board, I also there's a big, there's a smoking ban in this state. I don't know how this, I haven't seen anything that helps me understand the implications of this is smoke. I don't know whether it's cigarette smoke or marijuana smoke matters in the smoking ban. How does it implicate in terms of places that want to be lounges / restaurants / bars? I think that's the devil's in the details of this stuff. And I've been on the other side of it. I did work for government and an operational capacity. The legislation passes a bill. The rest of the government has to make it happen. And this one's pretty unclear at the moment. If I were sitting in a regulatory agency, I would be scratching my head right now saying, okay, how are we going to enforce this? What are we enforcing? Are we enforcing?
So Peter did mention the unemployment rate and he gave his thoughts on that. That was actually my next question. Michael, if you wanted to chime in, just based on your experience working with businesses in the Bronx community, could the introduction of the multi-billion-dollar industry make a dent in the unemployment rate in the city? What are your thoughts?
I think it's going to come. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. We're talking about building a completely new industry in New York City. And with that comes a workforce retooling, programs that need to take place. And, New York State does not have the strongest track record in rolling out those types of programs. So we rely a lot on consulting agencies or nonprofit organizations. I think, in the long term, if we do it right, it could impact unemployment, but I don't see it happening probably for the next 3 to 5 years. And that I'm being hopeful with that, just because the Bronx's the Bronx's employee base is mostly healthcare and hospitality workers. And as the law is currently written, hospitality businesses are not able to sell the cannabis because you can't sell cannabis with food and drink. So then that to Peter's point, I think that gets back to the regulatory agencies, how are they going to sort this out? And I think everyone needs to get on the same page. And, it's great that our legislators are going for sound bites and, and this is certainly something that I think would be beneficial to New York State in the long run, but we just have to make sure we're not setting people up for failure and people have a realistic understanding of what the timeline is in New York State to roll out a program that's effective.
What are some of those other possible setbacks the legalization of marijuana creates for businesses, especially here in the Bronx, if you can share?
I think, there are some landlord issues. I think some landlords are going to look at this and say, oh, well, this is great. This could be a cash cow for me. But if they've taken a federal Paycheck Protection Program loan, an EIDL loan, an SBA loan, anything that was backed by the federal government, they're not allowed to take that tenant on. Similarly with federally backed mortgage, I think there's some zoning matters that need to be, hashed out. If you're going to get a liquor license, there's the 500-foot rule. Similarly, I'm sure there's going to be something with the cannabis rulings in terms of proximity to schools or churches, things of that sort. And then there's also like the operational things, and that's like really getting into the weeds. Is there a certification process? What are the equity requirements? What are the health requirements? All of those other things that haven't been hashed out. And I know last week we celebrated 420, which is a big day for everybody. But it's great that people are excited, but we just need to temper the excitement a little bit because we need to focus on implementation and be smart about it.
Yeah, and just to get further into the weeds, and excuse the pun, so I live in a building and I have 3 kids, and I'm not particularly, my own value system says this, I don't think this is a great idea. And it's a pretty strong smell last I checked, and it's wafting through my hallways and my doors, and I'm not happy about it as a tenant. I think there's going to be a lot of that gets played out, and I guess it falls back on the landlord or the police or I don't know who. But if I'm the smoker, it's legal. I'm in my apartment. Leave me alone. I just think it's going to create a bunch of, and this will take time to sort itself out. But I think that's a real life scenario that in a city of 8 million could play itself out quite often and not pleasantly. Absolutely. Those are the things that, when you pass a bill, nobody's gone down to that level of detail, and I think the implications are quite significant.
Right. It's almost not, well, it's almost always when the scenario occurs or when that happens that things start to get, questioned and more questions start to come up with the implementation of a new legislation. So thanks for also bringing that up. So I know we kind of talked about this already, but just to, bring it up, over the next few years, the legalization of marijuana is expected to generate over $350 million in tax revenue for the state once fully implemented. Are there any ways that businesses that you work with could incorporate the distribution of marijuana to help them gain additional revenue?
I think it's going to be difficult. I think businesses have to be comfortable with it. There has to be that level of comfortability, and the state has to be very exact in terms of the regulations. You don't want to get hit over the head for something that the state hasn't thought out yet. So I think, could revenue be generated by like bodega sales for marijuana? Absolutely. Bodegas up until recently were selling K2. But I think it's going to come down to what the regulatory environment is and the comfortability that business owners would have with it. I think that there's a real market gap for entrepreneurs here. And with entrepreneurship, I think there comes an inherent risk. But I just think that with more established business owners, it's going to be a tougher sell because the regulatory environment is so uncertain right now.
I think you're exactly right, and I think it's partly the regulatory environment is unclear and very unsettled, and will get played out and adjusted. So you don't want to be in the middle of it being adjusted after you've made an investment in something without articulating what something is. And then I think there's going to be a personal comfort level I want to make, I can make hash brownies at the bakery. Do I want to? Am I okay with that personally? Is that how I want to grow my business? I think all that's going to play itself out, both in the individual decision making and then against how complicated this is going to be to put into play, because none of it was articulated, or I don't even think thought through, quite frankly, prior to legislation being drafted, and that always makes it a much harder.
A lot of questions that the businesses have. I'm sure the bids are here to help and assist in any of those upcoming questions. But before we go, what is some advice you have for businesses looking to try and make a comeback during the pandemic? They're still struggling throughout the pandemic here in the Bronx.
I would say have some hope. And I know that's a difficult thing to swallow because we're up against it in such a big way. But have some hope and figure out how to get re-excited about your business. I think a lot of people were very downtrodden because of COVID-19, and we need that shot in the arm to get people excited again, and excited about opening up their storefronts and employing people. And in terms of the cannabis legislation, my advice would be wait and see. We'll take a look at the regulatory environment, and we're also going to take a look at the street sale environment, and what that impacts for quality of life. Right now we have street sale, which, I'd say maybe 30% of what they're selling is marijuana. If that's going to be sold out of a local bodega, they're either going to lose their market share, which I don't think they want to do, or they're going to upgrade their drugs.
Yeah, that's a big worry for me. And I look at, I take as an example, off-track betting. So the notion was to take betting, illegal gambling, and make it legal. And as far as I know, it's the only business that failed when they had a guaranteed 5% income on every transaction, and it was a failed business. It did, and it also didn't stop illegal gambling. I'm pretty sure. I don't know for sure, but I'm going to take a wild guess. So I don't know. I think that is also something that is unspoken. We've obviously, the both of us are comfortable speaking about it because I think it's real and we live on the ground. So that, like, how that manifests itself, I think you're right. If it actually works, what's the street sales going to turn into? And is it worse?
Michael, Peter, thank you so much for joining us today and speaking about this important topic.
Thank you.
Michael Brady is the CEO at Third Avenue Bid, and Peter Madonia is the chairman of Belmont Bid. We'll be right back here on Open Tuesday. Welcome back. A campaign by the New York City Democratic Socialists of America calls for public ownership of the New York power grid. Public Power NYC aims to make energy more affordable and comes in response to increased price hikes and several blackouts caused by the city's main energy supplier, Con Edison. Joining us now to discuss is Adolfo Abreu, candidate for City Council District 14. Welcome, Adolfo. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you for the invitation and to have the opportunity to have a conversation on a real critical issue that Bronxites are facing.
Absolutely. Thank you. So to start, let's just get right into it. Can you tell us about Public Power NYC and the coalition's values?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's about building public power and expanding the New York Power Authority to build a utility scale renewable energy system here in New York State. And right now we have several private utility companies that are not accountable to us as a people. And like you mentioned, there's a lot of folks in our communities that have experienced high rates in terms of their Con Edison bill, blackouts in their communities. And I think this bill and this campaign is about making sure that we're shifting the power when it comes to energy to working class communities of color, like the ones in the Bronx and others throughout the state, and making sure that we're lifting up values that are centered on decommodifying our energy system. So there's not one that is centered on profit, one that democratizes our energy system so that we can build out towards a model of community owned, shared, renewable energy. And lastly, is just decarbonizing our energy system right now so we can move towards green energy and actually live to a Green New Deal.
Thank you for sharing, Adolfo. And, just to throw some statistics out there, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, out of all the large metropolitan areas in the U.S., New York City reports the second highest utility bills. I think the first is Boston, if I'm not mistaken. Why is this, Adolfo? Can you help us break it down?
I mean, like I mentioned earlier, right? We have private utility companies, right? So they're driven on a model of profit, right? They're providing a service, but at the end of the day, they're trying to maximize how much revenue, how much profit they can make in order to just report back to their shareholders. So we saw in 2019, and this is our data sets that according to the Public Power NYC campaign, that Con Edison won a raise to their fixed charges in their last rate case, and they made $1 billion in profit in 2019. So we've seen, Con Edison just spike in terms of the prices that they impose upon our communities and the profit that they're making, which is why they're the second highest across the United States.
And you recently actually joined Public Power NYC at the launch in front of Con Edison. Can you share more about this action and what took place?
Yeah, it was beautiful. I mean, throughout the city and throughout the state, there were multiple chapters of the New York City Democratic Socialists of America and other supporting organizations of the Public Power NYC campaign that were in multiple locations. And in the Bronx in particular, we were there making some powerful noise and shining a light on this campaign that we were launching right now, just to get the state legislature, aka Albany, so that our state Senate and our state assembly will be able to pass a series of legislations that will get to that piece of democratizing our renewable energy system, decommodifying it, and decarbonizing it. And we know that there's a lot of people who receive shutoff notices in a time right now where there's a shutoff moratorium. So we want to make sure that we're having those conversations with people on the ground about this piece of legislation. And we know that there's a lot of frustration and angst regarding to Con Edison. So that launch was about talking about those bills. And then now we're doing phone banks and knocking on doors just to make sure that folks are aware about this and are calling their state legislature.
And when we talk about the environment and how energy affects it, how will public ownership of clean, green energy systems help transform the environment here in the Bronx in particular?
For sure. I mean, it will require us investing in a modern and reliable grid that keeps the lights on for all Bronxites and all New Yorkers, especially with communities like ours who have the highest blackout rates that we've seen the last couple of years. It will center, renewable energy and ending fossil fuel pollution in working class communities like those in the Bronx. And we know that in this borough, we are the 62, the worst county in New York State in terms of health outcomes. We have high rates of asthma, the worst air quality in the city and in the state, and our children are 8 times more likely to be hospitalized due to asthma or just negative air quality conditions in our communities compared to others upstate. So this will make sure that we meet these benchmarks by 2025, because right now, if we don't have no accountability over these private utility companies, they will have us make this shift by 2050.
And now let's talk about the Public Power NYC's introduced bills, which your campaign supports. First, what does the NY Build Public Renewables Act propose? What exactly is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe, but we do in New York State have a New York Power Authority, which is a utility company here that is run by our state and mostly powers public buildings. So right now, we want to make sure that we are able to, through this piece of legislation, expand the New York Power Authority, just to make sure that we are able to get all public buildings to 100% renewable energy by 2025. It will ban energy service companies, like National Grid, like Con Edison, and allows the New York Power Authority to sell affordable renewable energy directly to all New Yorkers. Right now, if a New Yorker wants to get renewable energy, it is something that's a luxury that's afforded to those who are privileged and have the luxury to be able to pay more. And with this piece of legislation, it will allow for New York Power Authority to directly sell to New Yorkers and be able to have that. And lastly, New York, it will create union jobs throughout this process of this conversion, and will make, like I said, renewable energy available to all New Yorkers.
That second bill, Adolfo, is called the New York Utility Democracy Act. Can you share more about that bill?
Yeah, so this piece of legislation in the state, again, will allow for all New York's energy system to be democratically controlled by democratically elected boards. So this will allow the opportunity for real stakeholders, whether it's unions, climate experts, tenant rights organizations, or just regular New Yorkers, to have a say in terms of how the energy is used, making sure that we're meeting benchmarks, making sure that resources are put into working class communities of color, us who we've received the negative brunt of pollution, and guaranteeing that we have renewable energy that is affordable, that is owned by our communities, and that is not appointees or just private players who are driven by profit.
And what stages are these bills in now? What's next for the bills to be passed?
Yeah, so right now, we're in the stage of the campaign where we are educating people in the community about what these two pieces of legislation can do, and encouraging members of the community, whether in the Bronx, Queens, or other parts of New York, to call their state representatives, their state assembly members, and their state senators, and urging them to sign on to this bill, and guaranteeing that these bills leave out of the committees that they're currently in, so that we can see these bills be voted on before the legislative session in Albany ends, which will be around June. So that's more the pressure that we're building right now, and encouraging people to call their representatives and to push the ball forward.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for sharing, Adolfo. And, I also wanted to ask if there's a model that the coalition is following. Does public power ownership currently exist somewhere else, or is that something that's completely new?
Well, I would say that I would just encourage for folks to go to ecosocialist.nyc, just to learn more about other existing models across the world. I think in New York State, this would be a prime opportunity for us to build this out. And this has been a movement that's been growing in New York State for decades. It's been growing in this country for a long time. And we look at the New York Power Authority as an example of how we can build out a perfect model that will encourage just energy that's affordable, that's owned by our communities, that serves the interests of our communities. In that way, folks could just learn more about the bills and learn more about existing models and what that could look like.
Why was it important for you as a city council district candidate to join this fight, or this movement?
Yeah, I mean, it's important because in this district, we have the highest, it is extremely rent burden. We have, an average median income that's less than 30,000 in certain parts of the district. So we know that for a lot of people, so at times it's, it's having to make a decision between having food on the table or paying rent. And sometimes Con Edison bill is also a factor there. So we know that it's important to have accountability, making sure that our energy systems are affordable. And I'll finish off with this, right? There's people in public housing or rent stabilized buildings, so that there's times during winter when the landlord does not provide heat and hot water, and they have to buy, like a portable heater, and they use that as a way to just stay warm in their households. But then what that leads to is a higher Con Edison bill. So all of these things are connected. So we have to make sure that if we're building a vision for a homes guarantee, if we're building out a vision of renewable energy, that it has to be centered by the people. And that's why it is important for me to lend my voice in this struggle.
Thank you so much, Adolfo. Before we go, how can people learn more about Public Power NYC and your campaign for City Council?
Yep. So again, just to plug it in again, the ecosocialist.nyc, that is one of the best ways to learn more about Public Power NYC and to be able to join a phone bank or help table out in the streets so that more people can learn about this campaign and to get them to encourage to call their state representatives. And to learn more about my campaign for city council, which the election is on June 22nd, you can go to adolfo.nyc to learn more about me and my vision for change for this community.
Thank you so much. Adolfo Abreu is a candidate for City Council D14, and he's joining us today speaking about Public Power NYC. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for our show today. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.